Hello, my name is Roman Soto, and this is a self-reflection video in which I speak a bit about how I teach elementary Spanish, um, and what are some of my teaching goals. Also, I'll talk a little bit about the methods used and how I implement the ACTFL standards for language learning in my classroom. The teaching goals for my classroom is to facilitate learning of Spanish for students. And what I mean by this is that I try to make it interesting, keep the students motivated, and have them uh, related to um, real use. Also, I provide guides for the students to engage in conversations. In the following, you guys will see some of the activities we use as warm-ups or as activities for students to talk among themselves. I also, like I said, I motivate them to speak Spanish in relatable topics, meaning that they can speak of things that they normally speak in English. They'll be using Spanish to conversate with their classmates about some of these topics. Also, another thing is that we use culture to kind of provide just the background of the communities that speak the language. In my classroom, I try to implement as much as I can of the 5 C's of the ACTFL World Readiness Standards for Learning Languages, which means that I try to include as much communication as possible um, during the class time for the students uh, to interact. Also, I do use a lot of the cultural elements that not only are present in the book, but that I know I can use and bring to the classroom. And I also try to have activities in which the students can make connections with their own experiences, and that way they understand that they're becoming part of this community of foreign language speakers. In this case, it would be um, Spanish. And through the learning of other cultures, they can also make comparison to their own culture and be able to reflect on that. We use the flipped teaching method to teach language in a way that we give the students homework activities in which they learn the topic for the lesson, and also they like the grammatical points that are covered in the lesson. That way, when they come to the classroom, they are prepared to engage in communicative activities instead of going over the grammar. However, I do some reviews of the grammar just to reinforce their learning, but I do try to keep the classroom mostly for activities that the students can use. For example, some of the activities that are used as warm up in the classroom are for the students to talk to other classmates and cover things that they did, for example, over the weekend or the previous days, just to kind of practice using not only the topic that was in the lesson, but also the grammatical points. For example, talking about what they did on the previous days helps to cover the past tense. Also, they can go over adjectives and a lot of the vocabulary that is within that lesson is covered in this type of activities. Also, some of the way we implement culture is to have the students engage in activities in which they pretend to be in a Spanish speaking country based on what they learn about that country from instruction or from the book, and have them um, use the language to gather up information and kind of practice amongst themselves, and that way they can gain some knowledge in how the language is used under certain contexts. And once they're in a cultural context, they can also engage in other activities in which they are using the language to communicate, to gather up information with the use of technology such as their phones or their laptops to kind of keep using um, this concept of what they would do in this country and how would they do it in the language that they're learning. Another technique is to use fun activities for enable students to engage in language use through the answering of questions and listening of the music, as well as like covering topics, like I said, that are in the book and that they are able to generate, and in that way they are able to practice the use of the language. And normally at the end of the lesson, I have them kind of um, write or reflect on what was done in the classroom, and what do they feel or know they're able to do now that they've been using the language and engaging in these type of activities, gaining confidence in the use of the language. And for improvement, I plan to gain knowledge and how to use more authentic material. Sometimes I go based on what's on the book as far as cultural content or activities that the students can do. Um, However, some of these don't seem very effective at times, and that's why I put more effective activities. Um, Sometimes the students are really active in the use of language, sometimes they don't seem too interested in the activity. So um, that's why uh, those are the primary two areas of improvement. Also, I want to be able to help them make better connections as far as to what they're studying. Um, there's times when the students they seem like they don't understand really why they are doing something. However, uh, they they should have material that helps them understand that all the stuff that they're doing is beneficial um, for using the use of the language, and that they can not only do things that they do in their native language, but that they can also do it in Spanish. The teaching goals for my classroom is to facilitate learning of Spanish for students. And what I mean by this is that I try to make it interesting, keep the students motivated, and have them uh, related to um, real use. Also, I provide um, guides for the students to engage in conversations. In the following, you guys will see some of the activities we use as warm-ups or as activities for students to talk among themselves. I also, like I said, I motivate them to speak Spanish in relatable topics, meaning that they can speak of things that they normally speak in English. They'll be using Spanish to conversate with their classmates about some of these topics. Also, another thing is that we use culture to kind of provide just the background of the communities that speak the language.